I'm Stu. I'm 28, and my experiences, said probably more generically in an alpha male environment and a toxic masculinity and all of that. So my experiences were through addiction and grief and isolation, really. So I've always been surrounded by people, but I think the weirdest thing for me, I don't know about yourself, Joseph, was I can go for long periods of feeling incredibly socially isolated, but presenting not as emotional. I think that always kind of perturbs people a little bit and is at odds with the image of people feeling as low and as suicidal potentially as we do. I don't feel that people talk about it enough. I don't feel that there's a way to enter those conversations very easily, and I don't think it's something that you can define in a matter of terms.
I think we've got quite different experiences of that, because I think that's certainly for me, in contrast to you, where it's like people aren't noticing the sort of severity of where you're at because you look like you're holding it together really well. I can sometimes be the opposite, and often it will be a tiny little thing, something really trivial that will just be a moment where I just don't need another thing right now, because I'm spending so much time managing my person, managing the way I look, the way I sound, the way I talk around other people, in order to make sure that I don't let them know how I'm feeling, because the risks associated with that are that I come across as emotional, as a bit of a wreck, as not in control, and all of those things. And I feel like we've obviously got very different experiences of that.
When there's so much stuff going on, I get this sensory overload, but the sense of isolation with that is like I'm stood there in the middle of King's Cross Station and I'm just so on my own. So I think, and I feel bad for it, but I think part of the way that I feel with the suicide and me being presenting and being so vocal about it is because I know if I can talk about it and put it out there, then maybe I would be putting myself on a path to not feeling the way that I do sometimes. And it's really interesting hearing you talk about social anxiety, because I think everyone has their own social anxieties. And this is the one thing about talking, Joseph, is that when people do talk, as me and you are relative strangers, despite sharing this, is how kind of similar. We all have foibles or things that we don't like. It's really, really interesting to hear you talk about those.
That's why it becomes overwhelming, because in the same way that you talk about a sense of like sensory overload of being in a everything feels like King's Cross at rush hour, but you're totally alone. I feel like just like totally caved in. Like I have nothing to grab onto to say that's why I feel this way, or that's why why this is happening to me. So it's actually just stop worrying about whether you think you've earned the right to talk because your suffering counts, or some weird thing like that. Stop worrying about that and just say where you're at, because 9 times out of 10 other people don't hold you to the same standard that you're holding yourself to, I think. And that's been a really tough thing for me to learn, is that kind of idea that you don't need to set yourself these really stupidly high bars of, unless I'm here, there's something wrong with me. And I think that's the thing that I do all the time, is I just, I end up in a situation where I've built up so much pressure on myself to be a certain way and to behave in a certain way, that I forget who I am and forget to reach out for help.
Yeah, I think the barriers to talking about mental health and talking about suicide, it's fear of what people think. It's it's how big it sounds. It's if you say it, when you hear it, you say it. It is so big. It is a realization. It is a word that carries so much weight. It's something that quite often, if you're hiding from it, you don't want to feel like that's you. And it's not the done thing. It's not easy to sit and have a conversation with your friends. I know with men, I know how different types of men there are, and toxic masculinity is great. And you might have a friend who's brilliant and he's great, and you go out and have a great time and have a laugh. And I know that when I was drinking, There are so many people around me. It was amazing. He'd do Stewie. He'd do stupid stuff. He'd have a laugh. He'd always be good for a good time. He'd always be able to go out. But you might realise that some of the people in your life, when you talk about how you feel, it might be a massive change.
I think if you think about the stigma that is attached to mental health and the specific ways that gets gendered in relationship to sort of stereotypical expectations of men as or expectations that I think we put on ourselves, you know, as men to be solid, to be providers, to be good company, even like, you know, like to be able to hang out with mates and go out for a drink and have a good time and sort of be that person. I certainly think that the pressure to conform to some sort of standard of masculinity is a very real pressure, and one of those things is stiff upper lip. You don't talk about it because, you know, if you talk about it, you're somehow weak, or you're somehow you're not fully a man. And I think I see that in environments from people of all different demographics that I hang out with, whether it's in a rehearsal room for an opera, or whether it's that having a few beers at the golf club, like that kind of environment where men get together and the kind of way that they want to have a good time is light and kind of and chilled out. If you're introducing serious stuff into that conversation, it's a huge leap of faith. And I think that sometimes is just too much for people to for men to handle, that pressure and that expectation to be a certain sort of person. And I think it is, unfortunately, it's obviously a gendered thing that still has a really detrimental and prohibitive effect on men talking to one another about where they're at, and especially when the conversation is as big as a conversation about suicide.
It would be ideal that you could sit in a group and have a chat with your friends, but I think the thing is, you can have those conversations in the car on the way to football. You can have those conversations over a cup of tea. Those conversations can be 30 seconds long. Those conversations can be 20 minutes long. They can be in, at the bar. They can literally be anywhere.
What I'd love to see from people looking to support people with, facing suicidal thoughts and facing mental health conditions more generally, is that they can take a risk in broaching the conversation. And I think when there's that level of trust there between two people, you can get to a place where you can where the dialogue works and those conversations can start to be a part of normal everyday life. But you've got to kind of jump into the deep end a little bit, I think, on both sides, because at the moment it's not normal, and we need to make it normal to talk about mental health. We worry a lot in this day and age about triggering people, about being the straw that breaks camel's backs, and about saying the wrong thing. And a lot of that comes from a very good place. That comes from a place of trying to change the way we have conversations about things. But I can, I've said it before, like, I can promise you there is nothing you can say to me about, or ask me about how I am, that is worse than anything I've said to myself or asked to myself. Like, it's not in starting the conversation, you're not taking responsibility for my mental health. You're sharing in that. And if I'm in a really bad place, the risk you've taken to share in that will mean the world to me.
This is where I get a bit emotional, but I saw my friend 48 hours before he took his own life, and there's not a day that hasn't gone by since then that I wish that I hadn't asked him something. And if you know that someone's struggling, just have that, as Joe says, like, what is a difficult conversation going to be in comparison to the potential of not having someone here? That small step can change someone's life, and there might be a conversation with someone that they might be crying out to have. They might never have been asked that. They might have been going around their entire working week, the same people they see, the same things they do, but actually no one's asked them. I can't emphasize these things enough, but yeah, just talk, have that awkward conversation, because it's better to do that than regret something for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
Yeah, you want to live in a better world, and a better world for me is a world where we can not just save lives, but a world where we can change lives.